Thank you, Mayor Wang. It's my great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Mr. Patrick Strawbridge. Mr. Patrick Strawbridge is a partner at Consovoy McCarthy PLLC, specializing in constitutional law, financial and securities regulation, environmental laws, complex commercial disputes, and consumer protection statutes. He has clerked for Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, Judge Maurice Shepard Arnold of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 8th Circuit, and Justice Howard Dana of the Maine Supreme Judicial Court. Before law school, Strawbridge worked as a newspaper reporter. He holds a Bachelor of Journalism from the University of Missouri and a JD summa cum laude from Creighton University School of Law. Let's welcome Mr. Patrick Strawbridge for the keynote speech.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction and for the invitation to be here today. I and the entire legal team at Students for Fair Admissions and the organization of Students for Fair Admission owes a deep debt of gratitude to many, many people in this room who have been with us from the very beginning and have always supported the mission. I'll talk a little bit more about that as I offer kind of my reflections on the 9 years it took us to litigate this case and then the 1 year since the decision. It is hard to believe that it's the 1 year anniversary to the day of the SFA decision coming down, in part because of just how much effort and time and support people put into those decisions, and then how fast the last year seemed to have gone. But it was a year ago today that I was sitting in a car in Chicago where I had another business commitment, where I was frantically refreshing on my phone the website of the Supreme Court to see if the decision would actually be there. And my colleague in the car was frantically refreshing SCOTUS blog to see if they were going to get more information out there before the decision was announced. And the 30 seconds it took between realizing that the SFA decision was being announced and the gratifying news that the admissions processes at Harvard and UNC had been ruled unconstitutional was maybe the longest and most nerve-wracking 30 seconds of my life. But it was obviously a huge accomplishment, and what it took to get there is a little bit what I'd like to talk about today. And I'll note that I'm going to speak not with any slides. I'm really going to do this old school with a pencil and notepad. And one of the significance of that is I had a notepad almost identical to this one with me at the Supreme Court when I was arguing the UNC case. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the notes that mattered that were written on that notepad during the argument. But let me just start by talking a little bit about kind of what I think are the 3 or 4 key lessons of the effort to bring the SFFA cases and to ultimately win them in the United States Supreme Court. The first lesson, I think, is the importance of having a vision and sticking to it. We are obviously indebted to the vision and the guiding hand of Edward Blum, who is the founder and kind of the visionary behind Students for Fair Admissions. He's certainly not the only one. A lot of people in this room and a lot of people in this movement generally help support him and have always helped support him. But Edward had this vision, and the vision is very simple, that at least with respect to higher education for SFFA, although that mission is obviously broader, that whatever qualifications colleges may decide to use in deciding who should or should not attend, who should or should not get the opportunities, someone's skin color or ethnic background is just not a proper basis for that decision making. People should be treated equally as individuals, and we can obviously recognize individual circumstances that people may have had to overcome and individual gifts or perspectives that they might bring. But we cannot simply boil that down to their race or to their skin color. To do so is antithetical to the American ideals that were ultimately the subject of a long and bloody intra-country conflict, and that country came out better for the ideal that people should not be treated differently based on their ethnicity or their skin color. Edward had that vision, and without it, and I know for a fact, because he's told me multiple times, he would like to be here today. He's sorry that he cannot be here, but his commitments to other causes that appear to his heart have prevailed today. But that is not at all to say that he doesn't appreciate and your support and regrets not being able to be here today. The other vision that I have to call out is the vision of my late friend, Will Consovoy. There's a lot of rooms now where I speak to people and they never had the opportunity to meet Will Consovoy. I know that that's not true. I know a lot of you had the opportunity to encounter Will at some point in your lives, but the legal strategy that was implemented and ultimately successful in the cases came directly from Will. Will was my friend. He was my co-clerk with Justice Thomas, which is the first time I met him. This was an issue near and dear to his heart. Will was both a fierce advocate, a formidable intellect, and a kind-hearted and generous person. He would have one-on-one conversations with the students who were members of our organization as they were going through the difficulties of preparing to testify in depositions in this case. He would talk through the strategy with the lawyers, how we're going to approach it. He thought of everything. It's worth noting that when we brought these cases in late 2014, the Supreme Court looked very different than it does now. The cases were really broad, and the legal strategy was organized around the Kennedy court. Justice Kennedy was still on the court and was essentially the swing vote. And the initial strategy of the case were, how could we convince Justice Kennedy that the time had come to end the exception that had been made to allow for the use of racial preferences in higher education, where they had generally been declined or eroded in all other aspects of American government, at least as a legal matter. And to hold that vision and to be able to bring those suits and then to shift and be able to adjust to the developments on the ground was an important lesson. But you can't get anywhere without having that vision. And whatever the disagreements are as to what should colleges consider or what is the best way to go about putting together a college admissions program, the common vision that organized SFFA and that carried us, I think, through the long, long years of this litigation was the shared concept that whatever criteria we're going to use, we're not going to use race and skin color, because that's just wrong. The next important lesson, I think, of the litigation process is the importance of support. And obviously, AACE has always been a big supporter. I was telling you, Colin, earlier that I went back through my emails, and from the very earliest days of our case, I've got emails from him in my inbox that was forwarded on from Will and from Edward, suggesting strategy. I know Lee Chang's here. Lee Chang's always been a very big supporter of the case and the cause. Eva Gao and Joe Zhao both serve on the SFFA board and have been with us from the very beginning. Rick Sanders speaking here today, he's always been supportive of the mission, and Harriet's over there. And by naming some people, I do not mean to exclude anybody else. That's always the danger of calling out individuals. But I do want to recognize all the support that we got from AACE. And really, that support was essential, because we could not litigate the cases without having a broad membership in Students for Fair Admission that included students who had been treated unfairly in the process because they were Asian American. We had Indian students, we had Korean American students, we had Chinese American students, we had students of many different backgrounds, but they all felt and were willing to stand up, and in some cases faced questioning by Harvard's very well-paid lawyers about why they believed they should be given a fair shot that did not take their ethnicity into account in the admissions process. And that is a hard thing to ask for of a 17 or 18 or 19-year-old person, especially given sort of the superheated rhetoric around race on college campuses over the last decade or two. It was not an easy decision for those students, even though we were able to keep them anonymous as a matter public, although many of them, to their credit, went on to reveal their identities or to speak publicly about their commitment to this cause. But it was tough, and it was tough. I'm going to be very specific about this. The Harvard in particular was not very accommodating on this point. I think that they ended up taking the depositions of 8 students who had applied and been turned down from Harvard. Not only did they insist on taking these depositions, which really were of marginal utility to the case, they would not agree to schedule them around competitive summer internships the students were doing, so they had to take days off from like internships at Google and other high-tech things. They wouldn't agree to do them on weekends or nights. They made it as difficult as possible to see if they could get those students to back down, to see if they could get them knocked out, and to see if they could try to win by basically intimidating the members of Students for Fair Admissions. But those students gave us the support, and they held up for us. And of course, the other story, and to which we owe a great debt to the Asian American community and its broader networks, is I think Students for Fair Admissions initially was a few dozen people who kind of shared this goal, and Edward was out there meeting with people and promoting the organization, trying to get them to get it off the ground. But it was really, I think, a couple of trips to California and the networking effect that the Asian American community had, that in the matter of several months, really, the membership in this organization swelled to over 19,000, 20,000 people. And it did that largely, I think, through social media promotion. But it struck a tenor, it struck a nerve. It was obvious that this was an important issue to the Asian American communities, and the ability to tap into that kind of support, to be able to tell the courts that this was not, some fly-by-night, AstroTurf organization, but it was actually deeply broad, and it was a broad and deep coalition of people, was extremely important. And those people also provide a lot of financial support to the organization. Many of them made small donations of $10 or $20, many of them made large donations. And we truly could not have done that without all of that support. So you have to have the vision, and you have to have support. You gotta go out there and tap that support. And it was really one of the great lessons of this case, was just how much support was out there. And of course, that was always one of the great ironies of this case, is that racial preferences remain deeply unpopular among broad swaths of all Americans, regardless of their own race or ethnicity. This is not a situation where the advocates for ending the use of race in college admissions needed to feel like they were on their back foot or apologizing for this. This is a fundamental ideal that many of us grew up with and were inculcated from kindergarten, as it's not appropriate to discriminate based on somebody's appearance or ethnicity. And that continues to be the majority support. It is not the majority view of some of the elite educational institutions in our country, but they were very much working against public opinion on that score. We had the support, we had it from the communities, we had it from the membership, we had it from the broader public, and that made a difference. The third lesson of Students for Fair Admissions, I think, is the importance of persistence. It took 9 years to get those cases to a decision in the United States Supreme Court. We brought them in 2 different district courts in North Carolina and Massachusetts. We lost after trial in the district courts. We lost on appeal in the Harvard case in the First Circuit, and then we got to the Supreme Court and we won. Now, at Consovoy McCarthy, we sometimes refer to that as a Consovoy special. You lose, you lose, you lose, you lose, and then you win at the Supreme Court. That's kind of, that is a tried and true. But I think that it underscores the fact that you can't be afraid to bring cases that are going to require a change in the law. You can't be afraid to bring cases that you know are going to be hard and require a commitment, and you got to see them through. We also had to get into the weeds. I mean, we put a magnifying glass on the admissions processes at UNC and Harvard like had never been put on before. All anyone really knew about those admissions policies were a couple of books that had been written, and then kind of the self-serving amicus briefs that the universities would file about how their policy was very non-threatening, and it's just the lightest feather of a touch on the scale, and it was nothing but good intentions. And of course, I think everybody in this room is probably familiar with the record that was developed with respect to how Asian Americans were being treated, particularly at Harvard with respect to the personal rating, with respect to the fact that their own internal research reports had revealed the fact that Asian Americans were being discriminated against in the personal rating and in the admissions decisions process. The statistical analysis which established that Asian Americans were being penalized even as to white applicants at Harvard, that with identical characteristics, their chances at UNC and Harvard would more than double if they had been Hispanic, would more than triple if they had been African American with the exact same credentials of gaining admission. Those facts mattered, and the persistence and the willingness to go through discovery and to review hundreds of thousands of pages of documents and to take dozens and dozens of depositions of both the admissions officers and the administration at both those schools absolutely mattered. Then we had to go through the court process. And that was a long process, not only because Fisher 2 was granted at one point, which basically put the cases on hold for a couple of years while that case was litigated to a somewhat disappointing conclusion. We had to deal with a change in court makeup, including an open seat during an election in 2016, which was very nerve-wracking and very uncertain as to what was going to happen. We had to get through summary judgment proceedings, and we had to actually do trials in both cases. There was a 3-week trial in Boston. I think some people in this room have been there for at least part of it. In fact, I know there were some demonstrations both before and after the trial that were very uplifting for the trial team. It was very good to have that support, especially since we were in federal court in Boston, Massachusetts, suing Harvard, which is kind of as home team as you can get in a venue. And then we needed that support all the way through the Supreme Court process in a long period of time. So without that persistence and without being willing to take it all the way to the end, we could not have achieved the goal. And harkening back to my point about public support, part of that persistence too is not apologizing for asking for what is right. Again, this is a fundamental concept that everybody should have learned from a very young age, that we do not treat people differently based on race. There's no such thing as a benign racial preference. There's no such thing as giving a plus to some races without necessarily giving a negative to other races. And we can't apologize for that. And SFFA never did. SFFA was always committed to a approach that would vindicate a more colorblind and fair approach that was based on merit and not based upon someone's ethnic background or skin color. Those were the 3 things we needed. We needed the vision, we needed the support, and we needed the persistence, and we got them from many of the people in this room with which we could not have achieved the victory we did at Students for Merit Admissions. Let me talk briefly about what I think is next, because we're going to continue to need this vision and that support and that persistence. As some people in this room may be aware, Students for Merit Admissions is currently litigating cases against the United States Military Academy and the Naval Academy because there was language in the SFA opinion that basically left for another day whether the racial preferences used in those schools could somehow survive on a different basis. We are confident that it will not. We are confident that when we get those cases litigated, we will prevail. That's going to happen, and hopefully a little bit faster. We will be persistent, but maybe we won't have to have 9 years of persistence. The Naval Academy case is scheduled to go to trial in September, so it is on a relatively fast track, and we will obviously be doing that. You're going to hear about it from a later panel today, I know, but there's a continuing battleground in the K through 12 arena with Asian discrimination. Obviously, we've seen the efforts at Stuyvesant and at TJ and at Boston Latin and many of the other high schools. Those continue to need to be pushed, and that's important. And then there's always the issue of whether schools will be trying to get around the decisions, whether there will be cheating, whether there will be attempts to say you're complying with the law, but continuing to discriminate. Those cases are going to be difficult, but they're essential. They're going to need to be brought. We're going to have to look at the numbers. We're going to have to dig into what the universities are doing. And in some cases, you might have to bring another lawsuit or two and really test what they say they're doing versus what they're actually doing. But that's always been true for Title VII cases and other racial discrimination in the private sector, even in areas where it's long been illegal to use racial preferences or to otherwise discriminate on the basis of race. Companies that do so, have to be held to account for it, and we will continue to do that. I know that the timing is key, and the one thing I wanted to do was make sure I had time if anyone had any questions they want to ask. If we need to move on to the next speaker, I'm happy to do that. But I did want to leave some time for question and answers if anybody had them. Yes?
I learned Mr. Edward Bloom also formed an additional organization fighting against the racial discrimination beyond the education sector. Can you comment on that? I think if he needs support, I think that our audience will be happy to join the organization to support.
Yeah, the organization you're referring to is AAER, I believe it's the American Alliance for Equal Rights, but I'm testing my memory there. AAER is the organization. And that organization is basically existing to take the battle against racial preferences and racial discrimination beyond the educational realm to various government programs and efforts, and in some cases private programs that are violating either the Constitution in the government's cases or Section 1981 of the Civil Rights Act, which prohibits discrimination in the making of contracts. And so those cases have been percolating up. One of the most famous ones, or the one that I think has got the most press, is the Fearless Fund case, which involved a racially exclusive grant program that was being operated in the financial institution space, and which AER was able to obtain a judgment from the 11th Circuit invalidating it, basically putting it on hold, finding that it violates Section 1981. Those cases are ongoing. And yes, any support that you can give to that organization, I'm sure would be much appreciated. But it's helping to kind of expand the importance of SFFA and the light that SFFA shed to beyond the educational realm. Yes?
Andre, how long do you think it will take for racial proxies to be outlawed substantially? I mean, it goes around into decades, right? And we're certainly hoping not to have to wait decades until we can have colorblindness in various contexts.
It was certainly very discouraging when the Supreme Court did not grant cert in the TJ case recently, but do you think that they will be willing to do so on an accelerated basis and under what circumstances?
Yeah, I mean, I would not to quibble, but I am a lawyer, so I will quibble a little bit, which is that, I mean, I think racial proxies are already unlawful under existing law. You can't use something because it achieves a racial effect. If that is the reason you are using some allegedly race-neutral event, then that is itself a violation of the law. Those cases are obviously going to be difficult to prove. I share your deep disappointment in the court's unwillingness to take the TJ case. I thought that the concurrence, the dissent from the denial of cert was very persuasive. It was in a somewhat preliminary state, and so the Supreme Court is not immune to low-key political pressure, in that I think that often they like to go slowly, more slowly than we would all prefer. They often move very incrementally. I do not think that the fact that they turned down that case at this point in time means that that cause is lost or should be abandoned. I think there is a good chance down the road that the court will address these issues, and I know that some of the friends in this room are litigating those cases and developing the kind of factual records that we will need to win those cases. So I am hopeful that it will not take too long, and that there will be some pushback. I will note one other thing is that I do think you can see an effect. It's not universal, and we're all correct to be suspicious that universities that held on to these racial preferences for so long are going to walk away from them. But there is a bit of a measurable progress that you can see. And one of the best examples I can point to is UNC. The board of UNC, during the pendency of the Supreme Court action, shifted with some new political appointees to be rather more conservative than it had been. And the UNC Board of Trustees has actually exercised pretty strict oversight over Chapel Hill and has come in with some very specific instructions that they have publicly announced to Chapel Hill about not using proxies, not using workarounds, we're not gonna use race as a factor anymore. And that's progress. That's a state and a university system that had been doing this for 20 years and had filed amicus briefs and ultimately had defended a lawsuit and spent tens of millions of dollars defending that lawsuit. And the fact that, and I think in part because of the coalitions that this issue builds and the political pressure that this group and others can bring can make a difference and can help move the law there. So it's also, I will note, important to keep supporting Supreme Court appointments and justices who will apply the law and who believe in the colorblind Constitution and the guarantee of equal protection. Yes?
I have a question.
Sure.
Real quick, I'm on
Oh, there you go.
okay, quick question. You got a yellow flag, so you know who you
I think it's 1 minute.
Yeah, 1 minute. So quick question. Thank you for what you do. Thank you for going after the Naval Academy. Are there issues with other academies, like Air Force academies, West Point, Coast Guards as well?
All of those academies have said that they are using race in their admissions process. We have a pending suit against West Point. It's just on a slightly longer schedule than the Naval Academy case is. So it's scheduled to go to trial, I think, like next winter. No, not this coming winter, but a year from now. So discovery is just beginning in those cases. Once you win, I mean, the reality is once you win one of these cases, it'll bind all of them. And so it's not necessary to sue all 3 or 4 of them. I can't rule out the possibility that there may be other suits against the academies. But they're all essentially doing the same thing, and the legal test should ultimately, bind all of them. One more quick question.
Yeah, so now the overt discrimination is illegal, but recently the UC Berkeley law professors caught on video teaching students to do quote unquote unstated affirmative action. Basically, do it, but don't say it and leave no evidence behind. So do you see as the next battle process?
Yes, I think that is going to be an area of deep interest and intent. It's going to require an analysis of the data that becomes available through the federal education reporting system. And we're going to have to see if there's evidence that they made no other substantial changes to their admissions process and they're getting the same results that they were getting when they were using racial preferences, then that would imply that there's something suspicious going on and that will need to be looked into. I've got the red flag here, so I will wrap up my remarks in just 1 second. The one thing I will say that I'm pretty disappointed in is we heard a lot from the universities when we were litigating this about the importance for them of having a broad coalition and a diverse and exposing their students to new experiences and opportunities. But a lot of the universities, and particularly the Ivy League, have been very loath to give up the legacy preference even after this decision, which would be a very simple and easy step to move in the right direction of meritocracy. And I think that that's telling that they're unwilling to give that up, which basically just serves as a way to reward rich donors and connected people. And we should be suspicious that universities are unwilling to walk the walk and actually support what would be greater equality in the admissions process. And so I think that's going to help inform whether we think the results indicate that there's cheating going on and further enforcement litigation is required.